Hello fellow gamers, Peter here from the Esoteric Order of Gamers, the channel devoted to my absolute passion for tabletop games. And today I'm going to talk about Oathsworn Into the Deepwood. It's by Shadowborn Games and it's pretty cool. I'm really looking forward to talking all about it. You can see it looks spectacular. I've painted up some of the stuff from the first chapter of the game, but I'm not going to show you more than that because there are lots of spoilers in this game and discovering things is part of the fun. Now, before we get started, I must say that Shadowborn Games sent me this game for free to check out and also make a rule summary for. And I've made a rule summary. Here it is. It's already done, and I'll be posting it up the same time as this review. And I hope you find it useful. Now, of course, the fact that they sent me a free copy has nothing to do whatsoever with my opinion of this game. The only thing I won't be able to talk about is the price and how it relates to the game, because of course I got it for free. So enough of that, let's get started. Let's talk about Oathsworn. Now, you've probably heard a lot about games that purport to be a lot like the role-playing game experience. Now, I've been playing role-playing games since 1978, and I have yet to come across a game which is anything like a role-playing game. Role-playing games are unbelievable because they're in the mind, they're in the collective mind of the players. So there are no limits. You can do absolutely anything you want to. The very nature of a tabletop game is that there are limits. And there are rules, and the whole story is controlled by the game, and it's just a totally different thing. So I always get a bit funny when I hear people say, or publishers say, this is a role-playing game experience, because it's just not the same. This game, however, gets a bit closer than the other ones I've played, and they do some very clever things. And the first clever thing they do is break the game into a story section and an encounter section. So much like when you're playing a good role-playing game, well, I'm always the referee or game master, so I see it from that perspective. When the interest starts flagging in the story, you usually throw in a combat to lift up the excitement of the game, because most players, or the players that I play with, I should say, enjoy a certain amount of role-playing and they enjoy a certain amount of combat. And in this game, they've broken it into two things. Now, there are little bits of combat in the story section, but the focus in the combat is on the encounter section. So let's talk about those two different sections and how they work together. Now, in the game, you'll get two rule books, and they're completely separate, one for the story section, one for the encounter section. I've summarized each one of these books on one double-sided sheet. So you'll find it a lot easier if you download my summary to learn and play the game. There's also an encounter book which details each of the encounters in the game. There are about 21, I think, and I think there are some more on the way. And there's also two thick ring-bound storybooks, or spiral-bound, I should say, storybooks. Now, these storybooks are also in app form, so you can download the app and listen to a fantastic narration by actor James Cosmo, who was in the Game of Thrones series. And he does an amazing job because he's a professional actor, he does accents, the whole bit, and really brings the whole thing to life. So you may not even want to use these storybooks. I haven't even opened them as yet. Now, the first thing you do when you start your game is choose your characters. Now, you'll be wanting 4 characters, but one of the very clever things they've done in this game is allow you to focus on one character and then have a simpler version of a second character, which is called a companion. This is brilliant because you can really focus on your main character. It's much more complex. It's got a full hand of cards that you can use for combat, whereas the companion is a simplified version, so you don't have to handle a hand of cards for that. They just have a certain amount of powers. Absolutely brilliant, because there's one problem with games like this that have maybe a group of 4 characters playing a campaign, is that if you only have 2 players, you have a greater cognitive load when you have to handle 2 characters. So, such a good idea. Absolutely love it. And I'll go into more detail about that character's work in a moment. The story phase of the game is relatively straightforward. It's very much controlled by the book or the app. It leads you through a series of events, and you may make the occasional check and things like that. You also may gain combat tokens, which you can use later on in the encounter part of the game. Now, I can't tell you about the campaign as a whole because I've only just started, so I'm not sure whether the quality level remains high throughout, but certainly to start with, it's got off to a fantastic run. It is great. The story is really engaging. It's interesting. The stakes are high. The drama is high. There are characters that you get attached to. There's real emotion in it. I'm really impressed so far with the storytelling. And as I said, it's narrated by James Cosmo and it sounds great as well. I think it's up there with the writing level of Tainted Grail, for example, which is another story game that has very good writing. But it also has a lovely sense of immersion. It's a gritty fantasy world, and the stakes are high, the drama is high right from the get-go. And this is increased by the fact that the whole game is one of discovery. Even the initial map, the city map that you get right at the start, and I'm not spoiling anything because you could see that in the previews, even that is revealed in the first game. Things come out of envelopes and are laid on the table, and they're lovely surprises. And of course, when you get to the encounter section, you won't know what you're about to fight because it comes out of a box full of different little boxes full of miniatures that you haven't seen yet. And this is one of the great things about the game, is this sense of discovery. And I don't think that other games have really captured this feeling yet. It is like you're playing a game and you don't know what's going to happen next, and you really look forward to the next chapter of the story. So checks in the story section, and indeed most of the encounter section, are built around the might decks. And you can also use dice for these. Dice have been supplied, so you can roll dice, but I highly recommend using the cards. It's a very simple but effective system. According to your initial abilities and according to the items that you pick up, you get to place a number of might cubes on your character sheet. Now, when you do something, you will draw the matching colours of those cubes from the decks. Now, these decks increase in strength from white, which is the lowest strength, to yellow, to red, and finally to black. And the ingenious thing about this system is that you can draw as many white cards as you want. However, if you draw 2 blanks, you'll miss or fail the check. And this adds a wonderful amount of push your luck to every check that you make during the game. You can draw the cards, try and decide how far you're going to push your luck, and then reveal the cards one by one, hoping that you're not going to get those 2 blanks. There are some things that mitigate this, however. There are combat tokens. For example, the Empowerment ×3 token, which allows you to upgrade a card 3 times, or a combination of cards 3 times. So you could upgrade a white card to a much stronger black card. Also, there's a redraw token, so if you get a bad card, you can redraw it. If you get a card with a critical symbol on it, you can draw another card and add it to your total, and if it's a miss in this case, it doesn't count as a miss. So a very clever but simple system that adds a lot of tension and excitement and fun to the game. So you've got an enjoyable hour and a half or so, it probably depends on the particular chapters, half your evenings playing the story part of the game. And it's like a choose your own adventure type thing. You can move to different locations on the map, make choices about where you move, what you do. You might do some of these checks, a quick round of combat perhaps. You may gain some allies, which you can add to your ally deck. And all these things happen. You also get combat tokens as well, which are going to help you in the forthcoming encounter. And eventually the story funnels you into the big boss fight. And this is the encounter section. And now it's time to take out your terrain and your figures and your terrain map and play a really fun, involved combat against the big bad of the chapter. Now, I'm not going to go into great detail about the combat rules. Suffice it to say that they work really well. You've got a hex board, it's double-sided, which gives a lovely impression, certainly on this side, of a deep, dark forest, because you're usually going into the Deepwood, as per the name of the game. And you'll be taking out the box that corresponds to your chapter of the game and revealing the miniature of the thing that you'll be fighting. And it may also have little minions. So in the first chapter, I'm not spoiling anything because this was shown in all the promotion. You're fighting the Brood Mother, which is this huge, disgusting giant rat thing covered in other giant rats, and its minions are, well, giant rats. Rats everywhere. Horrible thing, amazing miniature. It's really big and chunky and looks absolutely horrible. Now you're probably thinking, well, how do I paint that if I'm just going to reveal it during the game? Well, what I've done is change the flow of the game a little bit. So our first ever game, we played the story part of chapter 1, then the encounter part of chapter 1. I'd already painted the rat and its minions. And then we went on and did the story part of chapter 2. And we ended the session with the big reveal at the end of chapter 2 of the next beastie. And then in the interim, before our next game, I painted it so it was all ready to go straight into the combat part in our next game session. And this seems to work really well. So the players have the enjoyment of the reveal of the monster at the end of the session, and by the next session it's all painted and ready to play. I should also mention this fantastic terrain. There's a big terrain box. You can of course just have counters of this in the base game, but this terrain box brings a lot to the table. You have these lovely 3-part trees. You see they come apart in 3 bits for storage, like so. Make sure you don't paint these bits where they join, and you may have to file that down a little bit just to get a nice snug join that is also easily put together. And you put these together and make your trees, and of course there's these cottages and some walls as well. So you set up your battlefield according to the instructions in the encounter book, put your players on the board, get yourself ready because you're going to have a nice, involved, long tactical bit of combat here. And it's huge fun. Now, as I said, I'm not going to get into the rules because they're quite involved, but the basic premise is one that is probably taken from the Conan game, and that you have a certain amount of gems to pay for actions. They're called animus, and you spend them to either move or use items or play ability cards. You've got a hand of 7 ability cards that give you special abilities. You've got items that do particular things, and of course you can move on the board 1 hex for each gem that you spend. In addition to the animus system, there's also a cooldown system. So whenever you play an ability card or a piece of equipment, you place it in a position around your character board. This can either be positions 1, 2, 3, or the 0 position, and in the 0 position they'll go straight back into your hand in the next turn. When you place a card, it pushes cards in that space, 1 space around the cooldown track. This whole system flows beautifully and gives you lots of interesting choices. While a weapon is always going to give you its might value, its special ability is only going to be used when you pay the animus and put it in its cooldown position. So it may be a while before you get to use that special ability again. By the same token, abilities also go into the flow of cooldown. So if it goes to position 3, it might be a while before it comes right around to 2, 1, and then back into your hand. Thankfully, you only have to keep track of all this with your main character. Your companion character is a lot easier to use. They just have a single card with 2 special abilities on it, and they can use them once per turn. They don't have a cooldown system, and they only use 2 animus, but they spend animus in different ways, so they have a sort of different currency return rate for animus. Now, the monster itself, of course, has a whole range of special abilities and things it can do, but you're probably wondering, well, how is it controlled? Well, for this, you have the stage deck. This is divided into 3 stages, 1, 2, and 3, and as you go through, of course, things get nastier. There are also a couple of boards which define the encounter that you don't reveal until the start of the encounter. That's a special rules board and an encounter board. The encounter board shows you the beastie and basically gives you its hit points. You put hit point dice on its various locations, and you're going to have to lower all those hit point dice to 0 to beat the monster. The special rules board tells you what it does when certain stage cards come up. So every time it's the monster's turn, you reveal a stage card and it tells you its actions for the turn. Now, the combination of this variety of actions that the monster does and the fact that they've got hit point dice on different locations means that you really feel like you're fighting a big, bad monster. There's a sense of dynamism to everything. You're trying to hit particular parts of the monster. The monster is rampaging all over the board, destroying obstacles in its way, pushing things out of its way. It reminds me very much of those big combats you get in movies, where people are being thrown all over the place and the monster is charging around and smashing into things, and the characters are trying to get around the back to do a backstab, and another character is jumping from tree to tree and letting off an arrow shot. There's a real dynamism and excitement to the combat, which really is better than role-playing game combats. Role-playing games, whether they're on a board or whether they're in the theatre of the mind, tend to be quite static. There's not a huge amount of movement. Once you're in combat, you're just fighting and that's it. In this one, you're moving all over the board all the time. The monster might be charging towards you or running away, and you're always trying to get the right position to do damage to the right location. And another thing that gives you the incentive to do this is the fact that every time you get a location down to 0 hit points, the monster has a reaction. It draws another stage card and attacks the person who lowered that hit die to 0. So there are consequences to actually beating down one of those locations on the monster. I hope I'm giving you some kind of sense of the excitement of this combat. The last game we played, we were fighting a monster and it took us about 2.5 hours to bring it down. And the time flew by. I did not notice. When we finished, I said, that was 2.5 hours, and we didn't even realize it. There's a sense of danger. You know it's going to take a while to get it down. You've got to cooperate and use each other's strengths. You've got to position yourself well. It's just a brilliant system and a huge amount of fun. I'm really impressed with it. And of course, all the way through, every time you do something, you've got that little push your luck mechanism of drawing the might cards. Before I go, the last thing to mention is that there are 4 boxes of cards, and as each chapter of the game corresponds to a level for your characters, you will be expanding your characters, getting more common and unique items, and increasing your abilities as you go along in classic role-playing fashion. Well, there we go, a quick look at Oathsworn Into the Deepwood by Shadowborn Games, and you can probably tell I'm pretty excited about this one. It's a lot of fun. In fact, I'm thinking it might be my game of the year. It's only September, so something may come up in the next few months, but at the moment I'm really enjoying this game. Yes, it is basically just a bit of choose-your-own-adventure story followed by a big boss battle, but for some reason, it just comes together really well in an enjoyable night's gaming. I think if you play it with the encounter first and then the story, I think that's a good way of doing it. You get 2 advantages that way. You start the game session with the combat straight away when you're fresh and you feel like playing that stuff. And then you can relax in the second half of the evening's entertainment with the story. Sit back, relax, pour yourself a nice drink, listen to the dulcet tones of James Cosmo as he tells you the story, and you make a few decisions, and then you can end the evening's play by revealing the next big bad for the next session's game. The sense of anticipation and excitement and not knowing how this campaign is going to go is very palpable. I just think it's something that you look forward to each time, and so far I've been so excited by the story, and I'm really hoping that it maintains that level of quality until the end. I'm struggling to think of anything I can criticise about this game. I think perhaps the only thing I can think of is that it's a space hog. If you've got the terrain box, you've got the 2 mystery boxes, the terrain box, the core box. That's 4 large boxes this size to store, as well as a couple of other bits and bobs as well. So it does take up a lot of space if you have the lot. But really, that's a pretty minor criticism, isn't it? So if this kind of thing excites you, I'm happy to say that they are doing a reprint, I think in October this year, so pretty soon. So if you're interested in grabbing Oathsworn, keep an eye out on the internet and see when they launch that next Kickstarter campaign. I'll make sure to let you know on Twitter and Facebook. Hope you've enjoyed this review, and of course don't forget to go to orderofgamers.com, the Esoteric Order of Gamers, where you can download my rules summary and reference. You don't just get a review from me, you get a whole rules summary and reference as well. It's unbelievable value because it's free. But if you do feel like supporting me, you can make a donation on the website when you download that. It'd be really appreciated because a lot of time and effort went into it. Or if you're feeling even warmer feelings towards the Esoteric Order of Gamers, go check out my Patreon channel at patreon.com/Esoteric Order and become a member of the EOG community. Please subscribe if you haven't already, hit all notifications. I will see you next time. Good gaming, everybody. Bye for now.